All right. In essence of having a very deep conversation, important conversation tonight that will probably take the whole hour, we're going to go ahead and get started right on time with roll call.
Benson.
Here.
Brunig.
Here.
Johnson.
Present.
Maibaum.
Present.
Schramm. Here. Weber.
Here.
Villanueva.
Present.
Mayor Mosier.
Here.
City Manager Leon.
Here.
City Attorney Denherter.
Here.
All right. Now is the time in the work session for anybody in the public that wants to address the commission on something not on the work session agenda. Seeing nobody shoving Kyle out of the way, we will go ahead and move on to our discussion on CMAR, and I'll turn it over to City Manager Leon to just kind of get us started.
Sure. Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the commission, and public who are either with us this evening or watching on our YouTube channel. Traditionally, we have utilized a delivery method for our capital improvement projects of a bid and design and bid. So we select an engineer, engineers help us design the project, and we bid it out. And the lowest bidder is the lowest responsible bidder is the entity that receives the award when it's presented to you, and we go through that process. There are other ways of delivering public improvement projects. One of them is called construction management at risk. It's not something that we've utilized before in the city of Yankton, but for a number of reasons that Kyle is going to visit with you about this evening, we think this is the right project and the right time to utilize this delivery method for the wastewater treatment plant updates and improvements. So I will let Kyle go through the presentation in which he'll explain what the construction management at risk, or CMAR as we'll refer to it, is about, and also give you an opportunity to visit with Ross if you'd like. Both Ross and Kyle have studied this extensively and have talked to other cities and other legal counsel about using this process within the confines of South Dakota state statute. So Kyle, we'll let you get to your presentation, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. What we want to finish with tonight is an understanding of the commission's comfort level with this delivery method. We are at the point where we're ready to start going through our requests for qualifications for engineers, but of course our engineer is going to want to know what delivery method they're utilizing. So we'd like to get an idea of your comfort level this evening.
Kyle, I know you have a lot of information to go to. Is it your preference that the commission wait with their questions until the end?
I got a whole slide with that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So, yeah, and just like I said, we'll give you some updates on our current project, just because a lot of how our current projects is funding really rolls into why we want to do CMAR on this one. So again, our CMAR team, on the next slide, our team that's been working on this, of course, Amy, myself, Alveric, Ross and her has been very involved in this, collecting information, looking at the legal side of it, and then of course Tanner Hansen, the wastewater planning, couldn't be here tonight. So yeah, in the presentation we'll talk a little bit about a project update. We'll take a closer look at CMAR. I will say right now I'm not an expert on CMAR, so I'm going to be very careful that I get too deep in that and give you false information. I'm starting to feel very comfortable with it, and it's kind of visualizing how this should play out, but I want to be careful I don't give you guys bad information also. So and then we'll talk a little bit about the timelines. A lot of that'll be timelines in terms of how these contracts will come forward to you guys, and how you guys will have those opportunities to off ramp if you decide later on in this process that you're not comfortable with it. A lot of new information. As I've given this presentation out here, it seems like I've had questions during the presentation and we get sidetracked and get off course. Hopefully I'll answer a lot of your questions as we go through the project. Just to note, we did put a slide number down in the bottom corner there. So if you have a question, jot it down, make a note of that slide, and then we can come back afterwards if you still have a question about it. So again, our EDA project is in progress. We have our funding secured for the next phase. That's the ARPA funds and SRF funds. We have a request for qualification advertised and have received those in terms of our design engineer. So we're currently reviewing those RFQs in the process of selecting our design engineers. And then, like I said, Ross and I especially have been doing a lot of research on CMAR and planning in the process. A little bit on our project update. We've got quite a bit of work completed down there. We got the 42-inch gravity sewer done. We've done a lot of the dual feed equalization basins complete. But we found out this week again on one of our updates on our electrical switchgear is still 52 weeks out. That's a year out, and our project's just supposed to be completed in August of next year, and we won't even have some of the equipment in. And they've got quite a bit of work to do after that yet. So lead times have been a big issue. When you look at our ARPA funding, you guys all remember how we had to go a pretty quick timeline on the front end of that to get to where we're at. And the main reason this is up there, again, we have that completion deadline of 2026, which is really set by the federal government. Our state doesn't have a lot of control on that. So we're kind of working backwards from there, trying to make sure we hit that deadline. The one thing about that has came out is we are allowed to front load our contracts and spend our ARPA funds first. So we don't have to have the project completed by then, we just have to have the ARPA funds spent by then. So that is a big advantage, so. Again, talk about the federal funds that were available. The biggest thing we did there was we were really trying to capitalize on those grant funds. Again, that 18 million that we had in grant funds was the max we were going to be allowed to get based on their funding requirements they had. So really it was about capitalizing on those funds. This is not a great market and a time to be doing projects. So we really want to stay on budget. And we'll talk more about that as we get through. Again, we did our request for qualifications for a design engineer. The submittals were due September 19th, so they're in. Staff's in the process reviewing them. Again, we look at all of our engineering disciplines when we review those, their experience and all that. The big one is we will have CMAR as part of that review, their CMAR experience and things like that. We haven't really looked into that before, so that'll be something new that we look at as we look at those qualifications for our engineer. Closer look at CMAR. Again, it's a construction manager at risk. It's a collaborative delivery method. So the big difference is we're really pulling our contractor in at the beginning of the project. So they're really part of design. They're almost a consultant at the beginning. Again, what we're trying to do is maximize their expertise, bring them in and do constructability reviews, value engineering. They're much better at getting pricing on equipment. They got real-time data on their pricing and things like that. There are off-ramps throughout the CMAR process. When I talk about an off-ramp, we can go a different direction and go back to the design, bid, build at any time. Our engineer's still basically doing the same thing, designing the project. We can always step away from the CMAR and go down the traditional path of designing it, bidding it out, and building it. So there's quite a few off-ramps throughout the process. It's competitively selected, the CMAR is. Again, we're bringing them in at the beginning of the project, so we don't have that bid like we normally do, so we have to procure them a little bit differently. It is legal, it's a transparent procurement process, and it's based more on project value. We're not looking to bring in an engineer that builds roads to build a wastewater plant. We're really trying to find the best value, the right contractor to bring in that can bring in that expertise. So even a better example is we're not going to be looking for a contractor that builds new water plants. We're going to be looking for a contractor that has a team that's done retrofits and has done this kind of exact work. So again, we're looking for the best value and something they can bring to the team. Again, we're still the owner. We still have a project. We still have an engineer and we still have a contractor. So a lot of ways it's the same. It's different. It seems a little scary, but in many ways it's still the same. Again, it's growing in popularity. We were at a recent conference here in Sioux Falls, our South Dakota Water and Wastewater Conference. There's several projects now that have been done. Again, it's legal. It's approved by our funding agency. The discussions I had with our funding guys out of Danner last week actually thought this was a great project for CMAR project. So again, owners get to customize our delivery method to maximize those returns on investments. We're going to try to bring in a team that's and how we score and how we select these engineers and how we procure equipment is not going to be based simply on value, but also on the technical side of what it brings to the table. Again, some CMAR projects that we've seen in South Dakota. Again, this is kind of coming, again, the Midwest is always a little bit slower on things. We've seen a lot of this to the south, a lot of this on the east and west coast, so it's kind of working our way into our Midwest region. Sioux Falls wastewater treatment facility that's going right now is a CMAR project with McCarthy Engineering, or McCarthy is the contractor on that one, the CMAR. The Sioux Falls Premier Center was a CMAR project. Sturgis wastewater treatment facility is completed. They were very happy with their CMAR project. Pierce is just finishing up their water plant. That's a CMAR project. And then the Harrisburg wastewater treatment facility was also a CMAR project here in the state. I think those three, Sturgis, Pier, and Harrisburg, were all PKG contracting, was a CMAR on all three of those. CMAR, DOT's, it's kind of become their preferred method for some of their vertical construction. When you look at way stations or rest area facilities, DOT's been utilizing CMAR on those projects. And one of the other things we're seeing is CMAR is becoming the preferred method for a growing number of contractors. And in this environment right now, contractors can be selective. We spoke quite a bit with Garney Construction out of Kansas City. Again, they do a lot of CMAR work down there. They only do CMAR work. They don't do hard bids anymore. In this environment, in this market, they have the ability to do that. So, again, CMAR is a tool, it's not a fix. Doesn't change the fact we still have a retrofit. We still have a complicated project. We still have issues with equipment lead times. That's not going to go away. Still have the funding deadline with 2026. Contractor availability and workforce is still an issue. And the biggest one is inflation. That's not going to go away. But what it does do is give us a tool that we think we can better manage those things versus the conventional design it, bid it, rip it open, and hope you have good bids and hope you have a good contractor. So when you look at that retrofit, having that collaborative team, having that contractor involved right away to look at that constructability and those things. Again, there's the option to do early procurement of equipment. So when we see these equipment, and as we go through and we're doing that 30% review and the contractor's telling us switch gears are 52 to 60 weeks out, we can do an early procurement process and get those ordered right away. Again, scheduling sequence to have that contractor involved in order of sequencing and maintenance of operation. We're going to have a lot of bypass pumping. We're going to have a lot of things that we got to do to keep the plant running while they do these projects within the project. So having that contractor available to really walk us through that, how they would do it, they're really the experts more than ourselves and even the engineers. And then again, inflation is going to be a big one. Again, it's not the best time to be doing projects, but we have to take advantage of the 18 million in grant funds. So we're really going to be looking at trying to keep this project on budget, which means we may have to cut some of the things out of this project that we originally had in. So I got that kind of highlighted. This may mean that, you know, within 5 years, we might be coming back for another project to finish up some of those things we didn't get done, and hopefully maybe under a better market than what we have right now to do that work. Again, it was about maximizing the amount of federal grant that we could get through the ARPA process. When you look at CMAR, again, we still have a separate contractor with the engineer, and we still have a separate contract with the contractor. So it's the same. What's really changed is the communication with the contractor begins much earlier and has actually increased a lot for the city staff. Conventional design bid build, we really don't have a lot of contact with the contractor. We run everything through the engineer, through their construction admin, back to the contractor. In this process, when you look at the blue lines on this one, that's your contracts. Again, we still have the separate contracts with each one. It's the line between the construction manager and design engineer, the dark line with the arrows, that really is the difference, because that starts at the beginning of the project rather than at the end. So we're bringing that collaborative team and design. And like I said, that first phase of that contract with them is actually kind of a design consultant type contract for it. And then they still have their separate contracts with their subcontractors. Some of the advantages, again, the owner remains involved. You know, just like we sit down with our engineer, and the only thing is now is we're bringing the contract to the table with us. It's an advantage. Disadvantage is it does bring another person to the table, which means it's going to be more time consuming anytime you bring another person to the table. So it is going to be more work for staff, for sure. Again, you got that contractor input during the design phase. That's probably the biggest thing we see as an advantage, and hopefully they can bring some cost savings to the project. Scheduling and sequencing. Again, having that contractor there to help us with that schedule and how we're going to sequence. Hopefully that collaborative innovation helps design the budget. We'll have competitively bid packages, and those packages can be put together to maximize local participation. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but really that contract with the CMAR is for general conditions and some of those bonding fees and things like that. The work packages that get developed will still get procured out and will be scored similar to how we scored the CMAR. And what we can do is we can build those packages to fit some of our local contractors. And a good example would be concrete. If you lump all the concrete into one bid, the round circular watertight tanks are pretty difficult for most of our contractors in town. I could probably think of one of them that would be interested in that, I think. If we split that out and have the one contract be for the contract for tanks, the concrete tanks and things like that, and put the concrete flat work out, the parking lot, sidewalk separate, that's a much better package for our local contractors. Will most likely get us better bids and prices on those. When you look at scoring something like that, when you look at scoring the concrete for a watertight tank, we're gonna look more at the technical side, experience, flat work. It's much simpler work, easier work. That's gonna be, when we score that, we're gonna score that much more on price, less on the technical side. So when we look at, as we go through those work packages. And then again, it's based on a guaranteed max price contract model, so there's a lot of accuracy and transparency. Through this process, there's a lot of transparency between the contractor and the city. We get to see all their financials, we get to see their markups on everything. So that makes it really interesting. When we talk about that guaranteed maximum price contract, what you see is when you look at this slide is early in the process, you really should see like 30% design, that yellow portion of contingency be fairly high because there's a lot of risk in there for the contractor. We're only at 30% design, there's a lot of unknowns yet. As the project moves forward, as they've brought in their input, we've got our design tightened up, you'll start to see that contingency number coming down. Usually that number comes down as you move through the process and that guaranteed maximum price level comes down. Once you set that guaranteed maximum price and you go into that second phase where you actually have that contract for the guaranteed maximum price, anything that goes over that cost is the contractor's risk. They are responsible for that cost. If it stays below the guaranteed maximum price and the contingencies that's left comes back to the city because it's work that they didn't do. So the risk is if it goes above that. So again, as we talk about this, I want to make sure you guys know there's several off-ramps for the governing body if you feel uncomfortable with this process. The first one is we do have to do some, I believe just a resolution yet, Ross could fill us in on that one if we need to approve the CMAR delivery method for the city of Yankton. So here in a couple of weeks, we'll be bringing you a resolution approving that as a method of we can use. Again, if you guys are uncomfortable with it, or if you have more questions at that time, we'll be here. Again, that's an off-ramp. We'll just keep going down the design and do our traditional design bid build. We'll bring our design engineer on through the RFQ process, and we'll come to you with the engineering contract for design. Again, part of that contract will be services for the CMAR procurement. We'll work directly with our engineer when we procure our CMAR contractor. Again, that has to be approved by the commission, so that's another time you could off-ramp. Again, we'll keep moving forward with the project. We'll just go down the traditional design bid build. Once we get our engineer on board, we'll go into that CMAR selection process, and we'll talk more about this. We'll do an RFQ. We'll shortlist them. We'll bring them in, do an RFP, interviews. And again, we'll bring you then what we consider the first phase of the CMAR contract, which is the design contract. Again, it has to be approved by the commission, so if you guys are uncomfortable, we can off-ramp again. And the final one is the CMAR construction contract, that guaranteed maximum price contract. Again, if we get to that point and we can't agree on a guaranteed maximum price, or the commission is uncomfortable with that, we off-ramp, we pay them for services rendered, and we continue to go down the design bid build traditional method. A couple of things I threw in there that Ross and I are still doing some research on is what they call an owner's rep. We've gotten kind of feedback both ways on this one, so we're still doing some research on this one. But basically, as we bring in an owner's rep to help us make sure that we're getting our side of the story in that conversation, to review our contracts and to make sure everything's up to speed on that. I guess I'm probably about 50-50 on that one. I'm not sure where.
I'm still on the fence on that too.
Yeah, so Ross and I will continue to research that one, but that's potentially another contract that you might see come before you. And then the other one's potential for additional legal counsel. I think we're kind of leading towards that right now, just to help review contracts that's been down this road before. So.
Yeah, just by way of comparison, the contracts for CMAR generally fall somewhere between 300 and 700 pages. So
So,
The first few times we do this, assuming we like it and want to keep doing it, we should probably have a specialty attorney working for us to make sure there's no pitfalls hiding in that paper.
and then as you can see, the completion date, we're just shooting in for that 2026 with the ARPA funds. I didn't put any dates on this timeline because we're still a little, this is our first run at this, so we're still a little fuzzy on dates yet. A little bit more about the CMAR process. Again, we're going to get that design engineer selected. We'll get our CMAR selected. We'll kind of set that target price that we're looking for. We'll design the 30%. We'll bring the CMAR in. They'll do cost estimating. They'll bring in some value engineering. They'll bring in their constructability reviews. Some examples on constructability when we're talking. One of the examples I heard is engineers had designed an arch in a wall so they could get a skid loader through because it was less concrete. Contractor came in and said, wait a minute, let's just square it up. The cost you're going to have for me to form that up, it's actually cheaper to have more concrete and square it up. So they'll do reviews like that. Tank sizes, a lot of time contractors have specific forms for tank size. As long as the volume stays the same, the walls and lengths can change. The contractor will help set those lengths so it fits what they have for equipment. So that's kind of those constructability things they'll bring to the table. We'll look at those long lead time items. We'll start looking at procuring those things that we see that are a year out. And again, that's all about keeping us on schedule. And then we'll continue to work through that. At 30%, they will give us an estimated guaranteed maximum price. Most likely at that point, it'll be high because it has a lot of contingency. But again, we'll look at it. And we'll get to 30% or 60% design. We'll do our work packages, get those bid out, procure those work packages that we want to get going right away. Again, we'll submit a guaranteed maximum price some point after that 60%. Hopefully, we'll agree on a guaranteed maximum price. If we do agree to it, again, we'll go into that design, construction, or finish the design, and go into that construction contract with them. Again, if we don't, we off-ramp and go back to the design bid build. Selection of the CMAR, again, because we're not procuring them through the traditional low bid, we have to have a legal and transparent way of procuring them. So we really go through an RFQ, RFP process. Again, we'll put out requests for qualifications first. We'll shortlist that. We'll go out for proposals with that short list, and then we'll do interviews. Again, we'll select on best value, not necessarily on low price. So we'll look at both the technical side and the price side of their proposals. Again, we'll select that criteria consistent with our project needs. So again, it goes back to that. We're going to look for a contractor that has specific work in retrofitting wastewater plants. Once procurement has been approved, that has to go to our funding agency and is public record. The one thing I will say about that is the scoring system and the scores will be public, but some of the things we look at in that RFP process, like a company's financials, will stay, what's the right word? Yeah. So
Not public.
yeah, it won't be public. So some of those things, those confidentiality, so we will have some confidentiality clauses in this too, so that some of those things like their financials and things won't be made public. But we will get to see those as the owner. So that first step through the RFQ, we'll look at the composition, experience, key personnel. One of the things that's interesting about that is when you look at a CMAR project, if they really want the project, they have to put their best team on the project. Otherwise, they're not going to get the qualifications and they're not going to get selected. So when you look at a company like Gritter Construction, who just got a project in Brookings, South Dakota, if they've got their A team on that project right now and they want to get our project, they're probably going to have to pull their A team down here to get selected, which means Brookings ends up with the rookie team. So this process can also help you get a better team of contractors and their better team on site. Once we get through the qualifications, we'll go into that second phase with the RFP, and that's where we make them really get a defined approach for how they're going to do that, which means their pre-construction approach, where are they going to bring to the table in terms of that constructability reviews, pricing, construction phase approach, how are they going to put their work packages together, and things like that. Who are their subs that they're looking at, and things like that. Contract terms, and then those cost components. Again, the cost components for that CMAR, those general fees, the the fee on the cost of work, their markup and things like that that they put on their or on their subcontractors, general condition costs, their bonding fees, things like that. And then they'll have that pre-construction fees, basically that consulting fee that they have in that first phase of their CMAR contract. Again, it's the best value selection for what we're trying to do. Again, a little bit of what they do during that pre-construction phase, they're looking at cost estimating. If you work through your engineers, a lot of times their cost estimating is what they had for costs on the last project. Costs are changing daily right now. So you kind of get more of that real-time cost that they're getting directly from their suppliers. Again, those constructability reviews, value engineering, they can bring some things to the table that maybe we haven't thought about, innovative ideas and alternatives. Work sequencing and scheduling will be a huge part of it. We'll be working on that bid package strategy. How do we get those packages out to our subs that's going to get us the best bids? Again, equipment price checks, and then that maintenance of plant operations. How are they going to maintain operations of the plant as they do these bypass things? If we're going to bypass our grit chamber, do we need a temporary grit chamber? Can we get by without it? Really, how are we going to maintain operations? Again, it's authorized in 2 phases. That first phase is the pre-construction phase. Again, we'll be doing that. Those reviews we talked about. The second phase is after we've had that guaranteed maximum price. That's when we'll bring the construction contract in. And that'll be the construction permits. We'll compile and bid out the work packages, can actually construct the facilities, manage costs and schedule throughout the project. They'll be required to do startup and commissioning of the facility, and then contract closeout, and they'll be responsible for the warranty just like a regular general contractor. So all warranty work will go through them rather than through their subs. So again, a lot of it's the same. And again, if we can't get to that guaranteed maximum price, we can't agree on it. We pay them for the services rendered, terminate the contract, and off-ramp, and go back to the traditional design bid build. So I believe that might be it. Questions, concerns?
So Kyle, what got you excited about this approach? You've put a lot of work into this, so I'm assuming you believe in
The
it.
2026 deadline and the inflation are what, we've talked about CMAR in the past. If you're in an environment where you're getting 5 or 6 good bids, contractors are looking for work, there's design bid builds probably going to get you your best price, best bang for your buck. In this market, project in Springfield, South Dakota had 0 bids for an intake and small water plant. Gayville only had 2 bids on a sewer lining project. I think it was estimated around $4.5 million, came in at like $7 or $8 million. Brookings project was estimated at $25 million, came in at like 33. HR Green bid out a project in Sioux Falls for I think it was a lift station related to their new wastewater plant, 0 bids. So contractor availability is an issue, and we get to bring our contractor on sooner this way. If we do our traditional design bid build, we're probably more than a year out before we're even looking at bringing on a contractor. And the ARPA funds haven't even really hit the market here yet. The projects you're seeing going out are projects that were already funded prior to ARPA. So again, that's $600 million in ARPA with matching funds. It's probably over $1.2 billion of water and wastewater projects that are going to go out here in the next year or 2. And to be honest, I don't think there's enough contractors in the state to do the work. So it's going to be interesting. So you also have that fear of what kind of contractors are going to show up to jump in on this market. So.
Obviously, timeline is of concern, which is a reason to be looking at this. So I guess a 2-part question. Understanding 2026, do we get the entire year of 2026, or so we can go all the way up to December 31st, 2026?
No, January, we are required to have the ARPA funds, that $18 million spent by January 1st of 2026.
Okay.
Now, again, do design bid build, you bid it out, the project comes in way high, you got to go back and redesign, rebid, it's not going to work. With CMAR, we're going to have those prices as we go. We're going to bring our contractor on way sooner. We're going to procure those things that have long lead times earlier in the process. And again, when you get to pre-procure, you can spend that money up front. And in the state, DANR is going to allow us to, again, spend our ARPA funds first and our loan money second. So again, the goal is to have that ARPA fund spent by the January 1st of 2026.
Then my second question to that is, have you been hearing anything in the pipeline? Wow, one of the things you shared earlier is we're still 52 weeks out on some equipment for what we're doing now. Do you feel or sense, or have they said anything about if getting materials in is the issue, it delays a project past a date? Do they think there's going to be any give or take if it's well documented that it was ordered by a certain time, but not really up to the city or whom we've hired to complete that project? Or is it too early to know if they're going to give any leeway on that?
Right now, what the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources is telling us is it's not their call. The 2026 deadline is set by the federal act. And because of that, they're saying right now, plan on the 1st of 2026. Beyond that, it becomes political at a federal level. So at this time, we're going to continue to plan for that January 1st of 2026.
But again, using this method, we can design our packages to spend that money as quickly as the project allows us to, well before we would have been able to under a traditional design bid build.
Correct.
Do we know when ARPA funds will be available? We know when they're going to end, but do we know when they're going to start?
So they are available. The reason I say it hasn't really hit the market yet is most people didn't have their projects pre-designed. They did a preliminary engineering report, so they're still in the design phase. So most of that ARPA funds will start being spent next summer. There might be a few smaller projects that waterline projects, and a few of those that got designed this summer are out being constructed. But most of the bigger projects have a fairly long design time, so you won't see those projects getting bid out until next spring, the next construction season. So, but they are technically available right now.
So our RFQ submissions came in last week.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about those, I guess, entities who went through the motions, and if most or all of them have,
So that was for the engineers.
Right.
For the design engineers, we had 3.
But they would also specify whether or not they have any experience working through a CMAR.
Yep.
Okay.
And all 3 of them did have some CMAR experience, some more than others. So we're in that process of scoring them out right now. So, but all 3 firms that did propose are capable of doing the work. It's just scoring them out to see who's the best, who has the best value for our project.
Kyle, you just recently completed a water treatment plant project. Looking back on that, do you see things that the CMAR process maybe would have made that project go smoother?
So when you look at the CMAR process, it's really about having areas where that constructability review is going to save you money. So when you look at a street project, linear street project, there's just not a lot out there that constructability-wise is going to find it's going to save you money. New water plant, it's all new construction. There's some things I think a contractor would have brought to the table that would have helped. But as you get into a retrofit where you have more of the sequencing, bypass pumping, and how do you make that square peg fit in a round hole type stuff, having that contractor available for those kind of things, I think is where you really see the value of CMAR. So, yes, but I think we'll see more in a retrofit style project. I hope.
I was relooking at the slides here quickly. One of the things, you talked a lot about the timeline of the project, but what is the timeline of this process? Like if it's favorably looked upon tonight, like when, there's nothing in here that talks about the timeline of the process of getting it set up, and when do you hope to have somebody in place?
I'm like I said, I'm kind of in that position where I feel a little bit dangerous, where I think I know what I'm doing. I'm not 100% sure I do, but I think, Ross, I think we can have the proclamation, or not resolution, in 2 weeks. Again, that'll give you another, and we'll be here to answer questions again if you think of more. Once we get that done, we'll have our Well, in the process of selection on our design engineer, I would say we're probably about a month out that, by the time we do our selection and get a contract approved with them, we're probably another month out on that. Once we get the engineer on, we'll go right into the CMAR selection, which will probably take another couple months to get the CMAR selected. And while we're doing that process, the engineer will be starting design. So again, we're hoping to have our CMAR on board before the engineer hits that. For sure, before they hit 30%, we'd like it to be closer to 15%. Sooner the better. If you get too far down design, it's too hard to backpedal and redesign things. So we need to have them involved as soon as possible. So really would like to get a lot done here by the end of the year, early next year, in terms of getting the CMAR on board and getting the process going. And then those work packages will come out. Procurement packages will come out as we see fit based on those lead times. And then on that, the thing I should point out is, once we have that guaranteed maximum price, all those work packages really come out under the CMAR. So those packages do not come to you guys for approval. That's under the guaranteed maximum price. It's already been approved by the commission. So those packages won't need commission approval. So you can see them, but they won't technically have to be approved.
You mentioned staff is going to have to take on a bit more of the burden in this process. So besides yourself, I think obviously, who are we talking about in particular? If we were to say yes to CMAR, who's going to see more of a workload?
Ross is going to see more work on this one, especially being our first one, reviewing contracts, working with additional legal counsel on that. And then staff on my end, Tanner Hansen and Greg Gussel at the facility. And this is a good thing, because they're not going to be able to come back and say, oh, why'd the engineer do that? Well, they're going to be forced into having their say in how the plant's designed and how things are built and where things are at and things like that. So it'll be the superintendent and supervisor at the wastewater plant, myself, that'll be putting in more time at meetings and sitting down with the contractor and going over things that we may not like, that they like. You know, they're going to come to things that save money that we're going to say that's not, you know. A lot of times we'll just make the building smaller. Well, we're the ones that have to get the pump out the door when it fails 10 years down the road. So we want to have our review of it too. So again, that's a lot of the staff that does the maintenance and does the operations down there. So.
Kyle, this project, obviously, time is going to be of the essence. In this CMAR, I guess this type of construction here, will there be any type of liquidated damages towards the end of the project if the contractor's not keeping up their end of the bargain?
Yes, I would hope there isn't liquidated damages based on, that's the whole reason we bring them in. You know, they're really setting the schedule and setting that in the contract. But yes, they're, you know, and the nice thing about that is they were involved from day one. If they don't get it done and there's liquidated damages, they don't have much of an argument. They knew what they were getting into. They were part of the design. Same with change orders. You'll see a lot less change orders. You can still have change orders. You know, if we tell them there's a 24-inch pipe buried and they have to tie into a 24-inch pipe and they butt all the fittings and they dig it up and it's only 18-inch, that's on us. That's still a change order. But if they get into some constructability things and they want a change order, they were part of the design. We don't do change orders. We work through it through the contingency.
Okay,
So.
Thank you.
Speaking of it, or in those lines, I see the contractor's account has to pay for over GMP. If they come in under or ahead of schedule, is there any incentive to the CMAR company? I'm just trying to figure out.
That's a really good question that I'm leaning towards the answer to that is, so they hit that actual price, there's a percentage of that contingency left that they didn't spend. We could say 10% or 15% of that contingency goes back to the contractor to attempt to incentivize them to stay under budget. I'm leaning not towards doing that. I haven't heard good reports of that incentive really working. And my opinion is the contingency is money they did not spend. They didn't do the work. It's our money. So we're leaning right now, leaning not towards having any type of incentive for that, but we can, and that'll be something we'll work through that. As we work through that contract for that guaranteed maximum price, that would be something we would discuss with the CMAR.
You got to be careful there, because if you make it too sweet, they're just going to keep cutting things out of the project to increase their profit margin.
Yeah, and then we're fighting with them the whole time because they're just trying to make the building smaller, and then my guys are gonna be yelling at me that they can't, that it affects operations in the future. So,
What about if they don't finish on time?
they will have liquidated damages.
So then
And-
that will.
Yeah, and honestly, it makes the argument of liquidated damages easier. Again, they were involved in this from day one. They understood the schedule, they understood the sequence. They put that together, it's on them, so.
Yeah, that also incentivizes them to keep track of the smaller contracts that they administer,
Yeah.
that they bid out, to make sure those subs are staying on schedule.
And something else I kind of forgot to mention too is those work packages that we bid out, that, I shouldn't say bid out, that we go out for procurement, the CMAR has the opportunity to propose on those, on that work. Of course, most of these won't propose on the electrical. They don't do electrical. They're gonna, for sure, that'll probably get subbed out. But they will have some things that they're gonna propose on that they'll go really hard after, because it's time sensitive in terms of keeping the project on schedule. Something like the tanks and things like that, that they'll bid really hard because they want to be in control of that schedule of those things. So.
Must be full of a lot of questions tonight. So you're doing a very good job of explaining this and making it sound very appealing as a route to go down. So what are we missing, or where have you heard in your research pitfalls that could derail this, that you've learned from other folks that you've been visiting with that might keep this on target? Because I always sometimes say if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. But this sounds like a good way to do this project, but I'm just curious.
I have not heard of a lot of negative feedback. Most of the cities who have done CMAR projects continue to do them. When I talked to Grand Forks, North Dakota, they had a bad CMAR project. Their first one didn't go as well, but they still saw the value in it, and they've continued to do CMAR after that. There'll be some bumps in this first one, and that's why we may look at that owner's rep to make sure we're getting our contracts in place. I think the contractor actually turns out fairly well. There's a reason why contractors like to do it this way. They probably actually make a little bit more money on this side of the project. But hopefully you get the savings on the other end with what they can bring to the table in terms of that constructability and things like that. So the biggest negative is that, especially for this first one, is it's going to be more work for staff. It's going to be more work for Ross, myself, getting through these first set of contracts. But again, that's not a negative thing. I mean, it's a good tool that we need to have in our bag. And contractors making money right now, doesn't matter. Design, bid, build, the prices are coming in crazy. In this market, they're just gonna make good money. They've got more work out there than they can handle.
At least here, you're going to get to see their profit margin, because that's one of the things they must itemize.
Yeah. And, we gotta remember too, our contractors are vital to what we do within the city. I mean, we rely on them for a lot of things that we get completed in town, so we don't necessarily want them to get rich off us, but, they do need to make a money and make a living and hire good staff to do the work that we want them to do, so.
Just listening to this, it sounds like the bumps in the road, the learning examples that we'll have carry less risk than the standard, design bid build process, where if the design doesn't go well and the budget comes way higher, we're kind of SOL because we're running out of time.
Because we're running out of time.
So
And, like I said, when we did the water plant, we had, I think, 5 bids, and they were all fairly competitive. That was a different time. Lead times were not an issue. Staffing was starting to be, workforce was starting to be an issue, but not like we're seeing now. So it's a different time, and it's a different project. Again, it's that retrofit where there's some more room for contractors to bring things to the table that will save money.
So you talked about the different off-ramps throughout the process. Where throughout the process are those off-ramps again? If
So
things aren't going the way we
the
want?
ones I listed were really the off-ramps for you guys. Those are the contracts that are gonna come to you guys, where you guys say, Kyle's been spending too much time at the wastewater plant, he's full of crap. We want out of this. As staff, we're gonna have the ability to off-ramp really anytime. As staff, if we feel this isn't going good, we're not happy with where we're at with our construction manager at risk, or we just don't feel the process is working like we thought it would, we can always, basically off-ramp and go back to that. The design engineer is still designing the project basically just like he was. So,
Can you talk a little bit more about the owner's rep? I mean, you mentioned there's some hesitation there, but I guess practically that role seems pretty valuable in my opinion. I don't know what that would add as far as an expense to have somebody who would fit that role, but especially for us here at the outset, if this is something we want to basically become masters of, this first go around and potentially use in the future, it feels like that could be a position that a lot of staff could learn a lot from and maybe, more or less replicate in the years forward.
So that is the positive side of it, and we've heard that from one municipality has really pushed for it. I think actually that's the only municipality that's I've really heard push for it.
Who is it?
Sioux Falls.
City of Sioux Falls has used owner's rep for several of their, I think probably their first 4 or 5 CMAR projects, the way it sounds. They really push the value in it. When we talked with Garney Construction, they did not see the value in it. They've really not seen owner's reps in CMAR projects. Where you see owner's reps more often is what they call design build, where the city basically goes out and hires an engineer, and the engineer hires the contractor, and they're a team, and they do the project. And there's not a lot of communication. There's not separate contracts between the owner and the engineer and the owner and the contractor. Then you see owner's reps. CMAR is, where you have the 2 separate contracts. Really, that engineer should be looking out for you. We've hired them to do that. We also have a separate contract with the contractor, so we have that contract with them. The negative side that we've heard about is you hire these people, they come in and they've got to show that they have value, and because of that, they kind of throw a wrench in the collaborative side of this, and you lose some of your collaboration because they're really attempting to show their value and almost making it more cumbersome than what the process needs to be. So we're continuing to do some research. We've reached out to a couple companies. Sometimes you'll see that owner's rep just be a separate engineering firm. And you can also imagine how that can work when you have 2 engineering firms who compete against each other, attempting to work together. So I see the positive side of it that you're saying, but we've also heard some negatives about it. So we're still kind of trying to weigh that.
Well, considering that it's an optional role to have filled, it would seem to make sense to me that, I guess if it is something that's under consideration, there's no reason why we couldn't also build in off-ramps for that role as well.
Absolutely, yep.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
not like we have to sign up for a person for the entirety of the
Right,
process.
and that's one of the things we're looking at is, in terms of that owner's rep, would they really come in at just the beginning to review contracts? Would we keep them on throughout the whole process? And then, we've got a little research to do yet on the owner's rep before we really.
But like Kyle's alluding to, I think there's a lot more value with the owner's rep on the front side, setting up these really complicated contracts. And then once your contracts are in place, turning the technical aspects over to the engineers. But
Yeah.
we're trying to explore it as thoroughly as we can so we don't screw it up.
Yeah.
Kyle, as we're ordering all of these supplies that have a long lead time, if we talk about these off-ramps, if these supplies are ordered, then if the contractor has markup and we decide to use an off-ramp, then how does that work as far as the stuff that we've ordered? You know what I mean? Because it's ordered, the contractor's probably floated that bill.
We will have to pay for it and take ownership of it.
Okay.
Yep. But again, we'll take ownership of it. We'll cut ties with the CMAR and continue down that design build, and we just have that stuff pre-procured.
Okay.
We did pre-procure the membranes at the water plant when we did the water plant project. We did procure those first and basically design around those. So you can do it, but it's a completely separate design bid build process when you do it this way. This way you're doing it under the CMAR, and the CMAR is actually the one procuring them. But if we do break ties with them, we'll be contractually, they're going to have something in that contract where we would have to purchase that from them and take ownership of it.
Other questions from the commission?
When do you foresee, we've got a couple of engineers, firms. When do you see the contract firms doing the same? Looking at and scoring them, and do we know How many? I mean, we won't until that time, correct?
How many contractors that we have interested in the CMAR?
Yes.
That's.
Do we have any inkling, starting to talk?
We've reached out to several. Schedules are full. I mean, there's just no other way of saying it. I mean, I hope we have at least one or two. I would love to see 3 or 4, but reality is I think we'll probably have 1 or 2. I really do. But again, I don't know. Being at CMAR is new. I shouldn't say new, but is kind of newer to the state of South Dakota. There are some firms and companies out there that really want that CMAR experience. They want to get that first one under their, because if you don't have the experience, it's hard to get selected. So there's, I could see a few of them going after it just because they really want the CMAR experience, and this might be a good shot to get it because we might not have a contractor with a lot of CMAR experience propose on this, just based on what's out there. So.
And when do you see that timeline?
Like I said, we're probably a month out before we get our engineer on board. Then we'll probably be another month or 2 after that before we really get our CMAR selected. Because we'll have to sit down with our engineer and go through this criteria, how we're going to score it, where we see the best value, and how we put that scoring system together. And then we'll put it out for proposals and go through those steps. And we'll do interviews with them. We'll go over that, really their approach, especially if they don't have CMAR experience under their belt. We really want to see that approach. How they're going to put work packages together, how they're going to score those work packages and things like that. So it will be quite a process to go through those interviews. And like I said, hopefully we have 3 or 4, but I really doubt it.
And how much of that will be like ours, like our decision? I mean, it's always going to be our decision, but how much are we going to lean on the engineer? Who would have come on board beforehand.
We can do that any way we want. We can have the engineer have 1 vote. We can have the engineer have 0 votes on it. We can have it simply all scored by city staff. If we wanted to bring in a commissioner to help score it, we can. We haven't really gotten to that discussion yet. So I would assume, though, we would have the engineer be part of the scoring team just based on the experience they have in understanding the design and what we're really going to be doing. So hopefully that answers it. But.
Other questions from the commission? I guess I would ask, not technically vote, but the feeling or the pulse of the commission and their comfortability of having Kyle and staff move forward.
I think it's a great idea. Let's try it out and get a good feel for it, because all accounts, it can be a good solution for a future retrofit project.
Yeah.
Oh, is there anybody not agreeing with Commissioner Schramm? I think we need to, okay, then I think you have your direction there. Anything else? Charlie wants to, come on up, Charlie.
At work sessions, we don't typically offer public input, so
I think it says that on the agenda.
I agree.
No, my question is, I'm hearing great benefit to this. I haven't heard the cost, and maybe you covered that before I got here. What's the cost of a construction manager? What is that at, 5%, 10%?
It's a tough one to answer right now. Again, it's changing in this market. They can come in a little bit higher. I don't remember what they said, Ross, on the design. I want, and don't quote me on this, but I want to say that it was roughly around 7 to 10% of total costs on the design
My
side.
recollection is upwards of 10, but I don't,
Yeah. So,
I don't know for sure, but that's, I think in the building climate that we have to work in here with material hard to procure in a timely manner, prices going bananas, at least we end up with a price that's guaranteed, and if there's cost savings, it can be plunged back into the project at a time when the prices of building are going up. So I think it's going to make it most likely that we're going to get done what we need to get done within the budget that we've set.
and again, that contract will have to come to the commission for approval. That that design portion of the CMAR contract is a separate contract that'll come to you guys for approval. And you'll see that markup. And that'll start showing their markup on everything they do. Markup that they put on their subs, their cost of bonding, their cost of insurance, all of that will be part of those proposals that they put together. So, but again, there's a reason why the contractors do like this. They make good money off this. But the idea is hopefully that bringing them sooner, there'll be cost savings on the back end that equal that out, or hopefully actually make the cost of the project less. But, when you bring them on for that design phase that they're usually not involved in. So yes, there is extra cost on that, on the front end with this.
As we start getting some of those front-end costs, can we apply for the ARP funds right away, or do we have to wait for some of that?
Let me get back to you on that one. I don't remember on that one. But I don't remember if engineering costs are covered. I believe engineering costs are covered under it. So as soon as we get the engineer on board and they start billing us, we can start. And for sure, once the CMAR is on board, those costs will be covered under, we can start using ARPA on that for sure on the CMAR side of it.
All right, other questions?
And again, we will be back, like I said, in a couple of weeks for that resolution. We'll be back with the contract for the design engineer and all those other contracts. So we'll be back. If you have questions, you can reach out to us, or we'll be back at those times to answer those also. So appreciate your time.
Perfect, thank you. All right, under our work session, under other business, there is no other business in front of the city commission tonight during our work session. So with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn the work session of September 26th.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And anybody abstaining? All right. We are adjourned for the work session, and it appears we have about 3 minutes before we start the city commission meeting.